Member for Karama.
Madam Speaker, look, I don't think it comes as any surprise to the Assembly that I rise to congratulate the Minister on his excellent report, which I believe is just a preliminary step towards rectifying the public housing crisis that has been inflicted on our community by a negligent Labor government, including severely destroying the lifestyle of many residents living in Karama and 𝑷𝒖𝒃𝒍𝒊𝒄. And you would be aware, Madam Speaker, that I've raised this issue on their behalf many times in this Assembly, including in my maiden speech, through to many statements, questions and adjournment speeches to this House. And I will continue to do so until this crisis is fixed. So let me address this issue through the lens of empowerment. I say again, the lens of empowerment. And it is worth noting that empowerment was a key theme of the CLP plan that we took to the last election. It was part of our theme. For example, just yesterday, the Minister highlighted how we are going to empower our bush communities and restore control of communities back to local Aboriginal people to help strengthen service delivery, control that Labor took away. And this government is focused on empowering our private sector to drive our economy forward, as highlighted in the successful passage of the Territory Coordinator Bill earlier this week. We have also empowered our wonderful police force and corrections service to better deal with crime across the Territory, with real consequences being introduced via various legislative measures passed over the last 6 months. And I'm proud to have been part of the team to do that. But this empowerment also needs to be given to our local residents in Karama, 𝒓𝒏𝒈 and Nucky Lagoon and elsewhere, so they are empowered to live their lives free of the trauma and anguish of the crime and antisocial behaviour associated with some, and I emphasise some, of the public housing tenancies across my electorate. They need to be empowered not to have continual fighting, violence, screaming, drunken behaviour in the adjoining property. They need to be empowered not to have adjoining public households host 20 to 30 additional visitors every evening, causing chaos and total neighbourhood destruction. They need to be empowered not to have to suffer continual sleep deprivation for them and their children as a consequence of this unacceptable behaviour. They need to be empowered not to have adjoining public housing tenancies in a total state of disrepair and a blight on their neighbourhood, destroying the value of their own properties. And I can give you an example of some residents in 𝒓𝒏𝒈 who've struggled to sell their well-maintained house for over 2 years, despite having significantly reduced their price. Recently, they thought they had a sale. But just before the sale was finalised, the potential buyers visited the property in the evening and witnessed the neighbouring chaos and violence. They immediately contacted the real estate agent to withdraw their offer, much to the despair of the owners. We need to empower our neighbourhoods so they don't have neighbouring public housing being used as drug houses. We need to empower our taxpayers not to have to carry the cost of sheer vandalism of public housing, and I'm not talking about wear and tear, but vandalism of the order of $50,000 or $100,000 per house. And we need to empower our neighbourhoods, and particularly those in Karama and 𝒓𝒏𝒈, to have a public housing density lowered to more community acceptable standards, rather than creating ghetto areas in these suburbs. And I particularly use Fawcett Court and Tabletop Place in 𝒓𝒏𝒈 as an example of this overdensity. Minister, I was very pleased when you mentioned the need to empower the housing staff to generally enforce consequences for such bad behaviour. And believe it or not, Minister, earlier this morning when I was taking the dogs for a walk, I was approached by a constituent who wanted a chat. He told me he was a previous employer with the Department of Housing with responsibility for managing public housing tenancies. He also told me that he left the agency some 8 years ago due to the frustration because the Labor government had essentially disempowered him and his fellow officers to address unacceptable behaviour and to enforce consequences. He has agreed to send me an email to document his views, and I'll certainly pass that on to you, Minister, and your staff. Madam Speaker, let me address some of the comments raised by the member for 𝒂𝒊𝒄. He said, housing is a right. Well, let me tell you, member for 𝒂𝒊𝒄, public housing is a privilege and needs to be treated as such. He asked about the efficacy of evicting irresponsible tenants, citing that they would just end up on the streets. Well, let me remind the member that there is an 8 to 10 year waiting list. And there are many deserving and homeless people on that list that would cherish, absolutely cherish the opportunity of being granted public housing. So let me make it very clear. If it comes to a choice of removing irresponsible tenants who continually destroy their neighbourhoods and replacing them with homeless people who will respect the local community, I choose the latter. And I have no doubt that once the first 10 irresponsible tenants are evicted, the word will quickly spread that we now have a government that will not tolerate such criminal and antisocial behaviour. I'd also like to talk about, we had the example, and the member for 𝒂𝒊𝒄 knows this example, a constituent who told him and has also contacted me, she lives in 𝒉𝒈. She does work out, I think, out 𝒍𝒑𝒐𝒊𝒄, which does sometimes have a reputation for a bit of violence and so on. She said she'd much prefer to stay out at 𝒍𝒑𝒐𝒊𝒄 than in 𝒉𝒈 because of the violence here in 𝒉𝒈. And that is not good, and it's not good for 𝒍𝒑𝒐𝒊𝒄, but it's certainly not good for 𝒉𝒈. And another thing is I have 15% Indigenous population. Many of the local Indigenous people in my electorate, they are fed up as well. Long-term Larrakia, been there 30, 40 years. They share the same frustrations. They say, Brian, we've got to stop this. They say, come and bring your minister to sit in my yard at night time and let him hear what I have to put up with. And we may do that if we need to. But maybe I should take the member for 𝒂𝒊𝒄 along just so he can see firsthand. So, just in closing, and I go back to my maiden speech and just a bit of reminder. For Jim, Barbara and Linda, who have continual antisocial behaviour occurring in neighbouring units in Tabletop Place in 𝒉𝒈, I am still here for you. For the wonderful Moore family in Connor and Magdalen Courts 𝒉𝒈, who have suffered sleep deprivation for many years from neighbouring antisocial behaviour, I am still here for you. For Kia and Tony, who have had to spend around $40,000 to help improve the safety of their own house in Fig Court, Karama, I am still here for you. For Fula and Drosso, who have had to almost turn their veranda into a prison to stay safe in Kujara Court, Karama, I am still here for you. And to all the other residents that I've sat down with across the electorate, including those living in Dorrigo, Karama, Mahogany and Copra Crescents, Mistletoe Circuit, Sedge Court, Manunda Terrace and Applegum and Kalimnos Drivers in Karama, and Abbott, Chambers, Delwood Crescents, Hummel, Maddock, Marshall and Squire Courts and Darwin Street in 𝒉𝒈 and Lagoon Road in Nucky Lagoon, I am still here for you. So I just want to commend the Minister. I think what you've outlined is echoing the concerns of my constituents. We are flagging that we are going to do it. We need to rectify it, and you absolutely have the full support of myself, and I believe you have the full support of my electorate. Thank you very much.
Honourable members, I advise of the presence in the gallery of